Do you think Lucifer is the name of the devil? What if I told you that such a name did not exist in the original biblical texts? Moreover, Lucifer appeared only hundreds of years after the first writings and originally referred to an earthly Babylonian king. In this video, we will trace the astonishing evolution, how the faceless accuser from the Old Testament transformed into a cosmic villain, how an accidental linguistic transformation gave him the name Lightbringer, and how throughout millennia he was reinterpreted. From Dante's frozen king of hell to Milton's tragic hero and even a symbol of enlightenment in our time. Prepare for a journey that will overturn your perception of the most famous fallen angel and his true paradoxical history. And to truly understand how this image changed, we must journey into the past, to the very origins of the biblical understanding of celestial beings. In ancient Hebrew texts, which became the foundation of the Old Testament, and were later embraced by early Christian theology, angels appear as pure, majestic divine creations, called to serve God himself. Their role was multifaceted. They were his messengers, heralds of his will, powerful protectors, and at times, executors of severe punishments. This was a world where every celestial being, from the greatest seraph to the humblest cherub, occupied its strictly defined place in the grandiose ordered divine scheme, fulfilling its part of the cosmic design. It is in this context of absolute submission and service, where there is no room for open rebellion or independent opposition, that we first encounter a figure who, millennia later, would be identified with humanity's and God's greatest adversary. But surprisingly, in its earliest manifestations, especially in texts dating back to approximately the 6th century BCE, such as the famous Book of Job, or the later, yet also archaic in spirit, Book of Zechariah, this character bears only a functional, not a personal name. We are talking about the term Satan, Shatan. Its meaning in ancient Hebrew was entirely different from what we are accustomed to. Satan did not signify a specific, personified entity that would be the embodiment of absolute evil and an independent source of darkness from God. Instead, it was more of a role, a function performed by a celestial agent. He could be called an adversary or an accuser. But most importantly, he acted not against divine will, but, imagine that, by permission and even within God's plan. He was not a cosmic villain, but rather an element of a complex system designed to test faith, reveal hidden weaknesses, or even execute divine judgments upon humanity. He was part of the celestial apparatus, not his enemy. The best and perhaps most striking example of this early understanding, which is utterly paradoxical for the modern mind, is a scene from the Book of Job. Imagine this picture. At a heavenly gathering of the sons of God, where all beings appear before the Most High, Satan also appears among them. He does not creep in the shadows, does not hide, and shows no signs of hostility towards heaven. He freely enters the Creator's presence, like any other heavenly servant performing his duties. His role here is that of a celestial prosecutor or tempter, who challenges Job's declared righteousness. Does Job fear God for nothing? He asks, offering to test his faith by depriving him of all his earthly possessions. And God, most surprisingly, agrees to this test. He grants Satan permission to act, but with very clear limitations. He can take Job's property, children, and health, but under no circumstances can he harm his life. In this dramatic scene, Satan acts precisely as a tempter, not as the embodiment of primordial, absolute evil. His actions, though causing immense suffering, ultimately serve a higher purpose, strengthening Job's faith and demonstrating his unwavering devotion to God. This is not an act of evil for evil's sake, but a catalyst for the manifestation of divine truth. A similar, functional role can also be traced in the Book of Zechariah, where Satan appears as an accuser before the angel of the Lord, trying to slander high priest Joshua. And again, his function is accusation, not independent, all-encompassing evil. This early Old Testament understanding is absolutely critical to our investigation. It shows us how profoundly different the primary concept of heavenly opposition, or adversary, was from the developed, deeply personified concepts of absolute cosmic evil that would appear much later in the biblical and theological narrative. At this stage, there is no hint of a fallen angel, of a grand rebellion against God, of Lucifer as a beautiful light-bringer cast down from heaven for his pride and ambition. Satan here is merely a function within the divine hierarchy, part of a complex mechanism of testing and judgment. This is the fundamental basis from which began the long and complex path of transformation of the image that eventually became our light-bringer, the one who, according to later traditions, dared to challenge heaven itself and fell into darkness. This understanding forms the initial reference point from which we will track his astonishing paradoxical evolution. It is in ancient, mysterious texts that we begin to catch the first echoes of the grand event that shaped the image of the fallen angel and became an integral part of Christian mythology. These biblical fragments, disparate in time and style, like invisible threads, wove together into a single tapestry, revealing the story of one who dared to challenge. One of the first and most intriguing such indications we find in the Old Testament, specifically in the book of Ezekiel, written in the 6th century BCE. In chapter 28, the prophet delivers a piercing lament for the king of Tyre. Listen to these lines and you will understand why they so intrigued future interpreters. The king of Tyre is described as the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. He was in Eden, the garden of God. His clothing was precious stones. He was the anointed cherub who covers. He walked among the fiery stones. But despite all this splendor, his heart became proud because of his beauty, and he was cast to the ground. It would seem to refer to an earthly king, but the imagery here clearly transcends the human. He is not just a ruler, but a being of almost divine origin, dwelling in a certain paradise. Early Christians, possessing an astonishing ability to see deeper meaning in symbols, very quickly grasped this subtext. For them, these words became an allegorical description of Satan's original glory, his perfection, wisdom, and incredible beauty, and then his subsequent fall caused by excessive pride. This text became one of the key fragments shaping the idea of how mighty and majestic Lucifer was before his catastrophe. Visual sketch: a majestic but proud king of Tyre, rising above the world, then quickly transitions to a shot symbolizing the lightning-fast casting down of a figure from the heavens, emphasizing the loss of former glory. Centuries later, at the other end of the biblical canon in the New Testament, we find an even more direct, albeit brief, hint of this celestial event. In the Gospel of Luke 10:18, Jesus himself, addressing his disciples, utters words that send shivers down one's spine with their power and conciseness. "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." This moment is extremely important. Jesus speaks of it as an accomplished fact, an event that has already occurred. It is not a prophecy, but a statement that confirms that before the beginning of earthly history, before the appearance of humanity, a catastrophe had already taken place in heaven, leading to the casting down of a powerful entity. But the most vivid and dramatic episode which definitively established the idea of a heavenly war and overthrow awaited its moment in the last book of the New Testament. The revelation of John the Theologian, written around the 1st century CE. Here in chapter 12 we receive not just a hint, but a detailed description of a cosmic battle. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But they were not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The text then clearly indicates who was cast down. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. This fragment from Revelation is the culmination of biblical references to the fall. It speaks not merely of the fall of one figure, but of a massive angelic rebellion, a war on a cosmic scale. Here, Satan appears for the first time not simply as the function of an accuser or adversary, as was often the case in early Old Testament texts, but as a specific evil entity leading an army of fallen angels. It was this text that definitively solidified the narrative of a significant angelic revolt and subsequent fall from heaven to earth. Thus, if Ezekiel gave us a poetic description of past glory and the cause of the fall, Luke, a brief but authoritative confirmation of the event itself, then Revelation, a grandiose picture of heavenly war defining the scale of the catastrophe and the number of participants. These three biblical pillars, like three monumental testimonies, laid an unshakable foundation for the further evolution of the image of Lucifer, the light bringer, who once descended into darkness. But how did the name Lucifer, which we so strongly associate with the fallen angel today, become part of this story? And why did he, the light bearer, become the embodiment of darkness? We will discuss this next. The name Lucifer, which we so strongly associate with the fallen angel today, is actually the result of one of the most astonishing linguistic and theological turns in the history of Western thought. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to the ancient world, to an era when prophets addressed powerful kings with angry messages, and turn our attention to a text that few associate with the devil in its original form. In the 8th to 6th centuries BCE, when the prophet Isaiah recorded his visions, he addressed not celestial entities, but earthly rulers. In the 14th chapter of his book, in verse 12, Isaiah utters words that would become historical. "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn." In Hebrew, this phrase sounded like Halel ben Shahar, which literally means shining one, son of the dawn, or morning star. This was not the name of the devil or even an angel. It was a prophetic lament and mockery addressed to the tyrannical king of Babylon. Imagine an ancient Babylonian ziggurat reaching into the heavens. At its summit stands an arrogant king whose pride has reached the skies. He imagined himself a god, dreaming of ascending to the heavens, raising his throne above the stars of God. Isaiah compared his incredible, dazzling power and majesty to the brilliance of the morning star, the brightest object in the morning sky, the harbinger of dawn. But just as the morning star disappears with the rising sun, so too was the Babylonian king. Despite all his glory and ambition to ascend higher than God himself, destined to fall. His downfall was as sudden and complete as the brightest star being cast down from the firmament. In its original context, this passage, Isaiah 14:12-15, was a powerful political statement about the transience of human pride and the inevitability of divine judgment over earthly tyrants. It was an allegory, not a literal description of an angelic fall. Let's fast forward 1,500 years to the end of the 4th century CE. In his secluded scriptorium, immersed in parchments and ancient scrolls, St. Jerome undertakes the monumental task of translating the entire Hebrew Bible into Latin. This would become the Vulgate, the standard Latin translation that would serve as the foundation of Western Christianity for many centuries. And so, when his pen touches the parchment, reaching that very passage in the book of Isaiah where Halel ben Shahar is mentioned, Jerome makes a choice that would forever change theology. He translates Halel as Lucifer, Lucifer. It's important to understand that for the Romans, the word Lucifer carried no ominous undertones. It was a common Latin name for the morning star, the planet Venus, appearing at dawn. It literally meant light bringer or bearer of light, from the Latin words lux, light, and ferre, to carry. Jerome, as a talented linguist, chose this word as the most accurate and poetic equivalent of the Hebrew shining one, son of the dawn. He did not invent the devil. He simply translated a metaphor about the fall of a proud king into Latin. However, it was precisely this seemingly simple and accurate linguistic choice, this act of translation, that laid the foundation for one of the most profound and far-reaching theological shifts in history. Jerome could not have known that his light bringer would soon become a grim name for the one who embodies darkness. This linguistic shift became an invisible bridge across which ancient political satire migrated into the world of Christian cosmology, paving the way for an unprecedented theological transformation that forever linked the name Lightbringer with the greatest of the fallen. It was on this bridge, woven from reinterpretation and new meanings, that the formation of Christian demonology as we know it today began. Invisible walls between ancient text and new faith crumbled as early church fathers, full of pious zeal and intellectual inquiry, began to codify the figure of the fallen angel. This was a period when faith was not yet strictly unified, and theological debates resembled a lively workshop where ideas were born, debated, and refined. Imagine the dim rooms of early Christian schools, lit only by the flickering light of candles, where figures like Tertullian, Origen, and Eusebius bent over scrolls, their faces tense in contemplation, their minds burning with the desire to understand divine truth. It was in these solitary yet fruitful discussions beginning in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE that they played a key role in reinterpreting that very passage from Isaiah 14:12, which spoke of the fall of the shining one son of the dawn. Jerome had only translated Hellel as Lucifer, but these church fathers went further, boldly applying this epithet not to the tyrannical king of Babylon, but to Satan himself. Fact 9. But how did this happen? Didn't Isaiah speak of an earthly ruler? Of course he did. But early Christians, unlike their Jewish predecessors, saw in biblical texts not only historical or prophetic events, but also deep allegorical, spiritual meanings hidden beneath the letters. For them, the fall of the proud king of Babylon became an ideal prefigurement of a grander and more tragic fall, the fall of an angel who dared to ascend above God. This interpretation did not arise from a vacuum. It was the result of a masterful theological synthesis, fact 10, weaving several biblical threads into a single, powerful tapestry. The key element, undoubtedly, was Isaiah 14, which described the fall of a proud figure from a high status. This image perfectly aligned with the idea of a fallen celestial being. To it were added other passages that already directly or indirectly spoke of Satan's expulsion from heaven. Take, for example, the book of Ezekiel, chapter 28. Here the prophet laments the king of Tyre, describing him as the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, and perfect in beauty, in Eden, the garden of God, with precious stones. Fact 3. He was cast down because of his pride and iniquity. Although originally addressed to the king of Tyre, for the church fathers, this text became an ideal description of Satan's original glory before his fall, his beauty, wisdom, and high position. Then the Gospel of Luke 10:18 connected, where Jesus tells his disciples, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." Fact 4. This brief but powerful image provided direct evidence of Satan's celestial fall. The apocalyptic book of Revelation, fact 5, completed the picture, describing a massive cosmic war in heaven, where the great dragon, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, was cast down to earth along with his angels. Revelation 12:7-9. This text definitively affirmed the narrative of a significant angelic rebellion and subsequent fall. By combining these seemingly disparate passages, the pride of the Babylonian king from Isaiah 14, the primordial beauty and fall of the Tyrian king from Ezekiel 28, Satan's lightning-fast fall from Luke 10:18, and the cosmic battle from Revelation 12, early theologians were able to construct a coherent, compelling story about the greatest angelic rebel. This is how the name Lucifer, bearer of light, came to be understood as Satan's name before his fall, a name symbolizing his original glory and beauty. But who definitively solidified this interpretation in mainstream Christian theology? This role was undertaken by one of the greatest thinkers in Christian history, Augustine Aurelius, Bishop of Hippo, who lived at the turn of the 4th and 5th centuries CE, Fact 11. Augustine, with his colossal intellectual authority and systematic approach to theology, not only embraced these developing ideas, but deeply integrated them into his extensive theological system. In his works, particularly City of God, the story of Lucifer's fall as Satan's original name, caused by his pride and rebellion against God, received its final and most influential articulation. Thanks to Augustine, this concept transformed from a peripheral interpretation into a fundamental pillar of Christian doctrine. He didn't just tell a story, he gave it theological depth, explaining how the sin of pride, the desire to be like God, could lead to the fall of even the most perfect creation. And so, Lucifer, once a symbol of the morning star heralding dawn, became a name forever linked to the history of the greatest darkness born of pride, initiating centuries of demonology and the myth of the fallen angel that would continue to inspire and terrify generations. Indeed, throughout the Middle Ages, the narrative of Lucifer as the most beautiful, most powerful angel fallen from grace due to his excessive pride became not merely a theological fact, but a fundamental element of Christian demonology and morality plays. This image, once based on the interpretation of the prophecies of Isaiah and Ezekiel, transformed over centuries into a powerful symbol of ultimate evil, serving as a vivid lesson for every Christian. The Church actively used his story to teach about the deadly sins, especially pride, that very pride that lifted him too high and cast him into the abyss. Fact 12. But if previously Lucifer was more of an abstract concept or archetype of the fallen, then in the early 14th century one of humanity's greatest poets gave him concrete, terrifying flesh, forever cementing this image in Western culture. We are speaking, of course, of Dante Alighieri and his immortal Divine Comedy, or more precisely, its first part, the Inferno. Dante doesn't just describe hell, he builds it, gives it architecture, gravity, and unbearable cold. And at the very heart of this icy ninth circle, frozen in Lake Cocytus, awaits its central, most terrifying inhabitant, Lucifer, or as Dante calls him, Satan. Imagine a scene that has since haunted the imaginations of millions. A colossal monster whose size overshadows even the largest giants. This is no longer the radiant light bringer he once was. Now he is the complete opposite, an embodiment of deformation and repulsion. Dante's figure of Lucifer is terrifyingly monumental. He is frozen waist-deep in eternal ice, created by the movement of his gigantic leathery wings resembling a bat's wings. These wings, once carrying him to celestial heights, now only generate an icy wind, binding all of hell in perpetual frost. His appearance is a caricature of the Holy Trinity, of the very harmony of creation. Instead of one face, he has three, each with its own color and meaning. The central one is red, crimson, like blood and wrath. The right one is yellowish pale, like sickness and impotence, and the left one is black, like night and despair. And these three mouths are not empty. In each of them, Lucifer, the greatest of traitors, eternally chews on humanity's greatest traitors. In the central mouth is Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus, his head inside, his legs dangling out. On the sides are Brutus and Cassius, betrayers of Caesar, each of whom also eternally and resignedly endures this torment. Dante places them at the very bottom of hell, not without reason. For him, betrayal is the most base, most repugnant sin, for it destroys the foundation of trust, the foundation of all bonds. And Lucifer, who himself betrayed God, is doomed to be the eternal punisher for those who followed in his footsteps. Fact 13. Thus, Dante's literary genius did not just describe, he visualized Lucifer. He gave him a concrete, physically tangible form that embodied not only the sin of pride, but also the ultimate, repulsive ugliness into which absolute evil transforms. Dante's image of Lucifer, monstrous, immobile, eternally suffering and tormenting others at the center of icy hell, became an archetype for many subsequent works. He solidified in the Western mind the notion of the fallen angel not merely as an adversary or accuser, but as the king of darkness, a monster whose once great beauty and power were distorted and frozen by his own immeasurable arrogance. This was an image that inspired artists, writers, and theologians for centuries, becoming an integral part of the Western cultural code and a precursor to new, even more complex interpretations that we will see in the Renaissance. Whose once great beauty and power were distorted and frozen by his own immeasurable arrogance. This was an image that inspired artists, writers, and theologians for centuries, becoming an integral part of the Western cultural code and a precursor to new, even more complex interpretations that we will see in the Renaissance. It was then, in 17th century England, that a giant of thought appeared on the literary scene, whose epic poem overturned centuries-old perceptions of the fallen angel, John Milton. His monumental work, Paradise Lost, published in 1667, became not just a literary masterpiece, but also the most influential work that forever shaped the modern understanding of Lucifer. Before Milton, this image often appeared either as an abstract symbol of evil or as a monstrous ice-bound demon, as in Dante's Inferno. But Milton breathed new life into him, depicting him as a majestic, defiant, and incredibly charismatic leader of the rebellious angels. He appears not merely as an evil entity, but as a colossal figure possessing immense will and intellect, capable of leading legions of celestials. It was Milton, similar to the early church fathers, who solidified the tradition of calling this proud angel Lucifer before his expulsion from heaven. This name, meaning light-bringer, perfectly underscores his original splendor and high status, which he possessed before his rebellion. He was not just an angel, but a brilliant morning star whose radiance overshadowed many, but whose pride, as in the case of the Babylonian king from the book of Isaiah, led to a catastrophic fall. However, with all his genius, Milton, probably without realizing it himself, created an image that went beyond his original intention. Although the poem's aim was to justify the ways of God to men, many readers saw in Milton's Lucifer not a villain, but a tragic hero, a figure of an indomitable spirit who dared to challenge omnipotent tyranny. His famous phrase, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven," became a manifesto of defiance, a symbol of the pursuit of freedom at any cost. This interpretation, born from the pen of a Puritan, had a colossal impact on subsequent romantic and artistic movements. Imagine, after defeat, when the gates of heaven closed behind them forever, the mighty figure of Lucifer rises above his fallen legions in the somber pandemonium, the capital of the newly created hell. His face, once perfect, now bears the imprint of inconsolable sorrow mixed with defiant pride. In his eyes burns the flame of an unyielding will, even as he gazes upon the countless ranks of his followers, angels sharing his fate and his rebellious spirit. This is an image not of caricatured evil, but of greatness distorted by ambition, yet not broken by defeat. It is in Paradise Lost that we see how ancient tales, biblical allegories, and theological doctrines intertwine into an entirely new, unique fabric. Milton did not merely retell an old story, he reinterpreted it, imbuing Lucifer with such complexity and depth that he transformed from a biblical antagonist into a multifaceted cultural icon. His rebellion became not just a sin, but a symbol of the struggle for self-determination. His fall, not only a punishment, but a tragedy of grandiose scale. Thus, literature proved its incredible power. the ability to reforge ancient myths, imbuing them with new meanings, and inspiring generations of thinkers, artists, and rebels to entirely different, sometimes unexpected interpretations of this eternal drama. But what if we turn away from medieval fables and romantic poems, from tragedies of grandiose scale, and look at the light-bringer through the eyes of the 21st century? Modernity offers entirely different lenses for this ancient figure, starting with the cold, analytical gaze of biblical studies, and then moving to utterly unexpected esoteric readings.
Imagine a scholar bending over ancient scrolls, armed with a magnifying glass and centuries of knowledge. Here's the first part of our artistic sketch. He will tell you, if you delve into the original Hebrew text of the book of Isaiah, Fact 6, in chapter 14, where the figure later called Lucifer first appears, you will not find the name of a demon or a specific spiritual entity of evil there. Verse 12 speaks of a Helel Ben-Shahar, which literally translates as Shining One, Son of the Dawn or Morning Star, and this is not just an abstract comparison. In its original context, Fact 7, the book of Isaiah is a prophetic lament, but rather a biting taunt directed at the proud, tyrannical king of Babylon. His fall from the heights of power is compared to the morning star falling from the heavens due to his boundless pride and arrogant ambition to ascend above God. This was a metaphor, political satire, not a revelation about a fallen angel. So, where did Lucifer as Satan come from? It all began much later, in the late 4th century CE, when St. Jerome Fact 8 was translating the Hebrew Bible into Latin. He chose the word Lucifer for Helel, which was a common Latin name for the morning star, the planet Venus. Think about it, light bringer, bearer of light, a beautiful, neutral word. But it was this translation that became the catalyst. Early church fathers, beginning in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Fact 9, such as Tertullian and Origen, were already actively working on synthesizing various biblical passages. They took the image of a proud, falling figure from Isaiah 14 and combined it with descriptions of Satan's expulsion from heaven found in other texts. For instance, in the book of Ezekiel, Fact 3, which speaks of the king of Tyre expelled for pride, or in the Gospel of Luke, Fact 4, where Jesus speaks of Satan falling like lightning, or, crucially, in the book of Revelation, Fact 5, which clearly describes a cosmic war and the casting down of the dragon. Thus, by the time of Augustine Aurelius, by the late 4th or early 5th century, Fact 11, the identification of Lucifer with Satan as his original angelic name became entrenched in Christian theology. This was a powerful, yet theological interpretation, developed over centuries, rather than a direct indication of the spiritual entity's proper name in the original Hebrew text. This is precisely what modern biblical scholarship emphasizes. Fact 16. It is not a direct indication, but the result of a complex centuries-long process of accumulation and reinterpretation. But no sooner do we close these dusty volumes and put down the binoculars of scientific analysis than an entirely different, even shocking for many, panorama unfolds before us. And here's the second part of our artistic sketch. Imagine dazzling streams of light breaking through the utter darkness of ignorance and dogma, symbolizing enlightenment and liberation. In some modern esoteric, occult, and New Age traditions, Fact 17, Lucifer is perceived not just differently, he is perceived as the complete opposite of Satan, who is generally considered the embodiment of absolute evil. This is not just a nuance, it is a fundamental reinterpretation.
Here, Lucifer ceases to be a demon and becomes a powerful archetype. He symbolizes enlightenment, knowledge, that very Gnostic knowledge that frees humanity from ignorance. He is the bearer of the light of truth, which can sometimes be uncomfortable but always leads to development. He is associated with individual sovereignty, the idea that every person possesses inherent power and autonomy, capable of thinking independently and making their own decisions without blindly submitting to external authorities or dogmas. Imagine a figure who rebels not against good, but against dogmatic limitations, against blind faith that suppresses critical thinking and deprives individuals of freedom of choice. In these teachings, Lucifer is one who challenges established norms, who encourages doubt and the search for personal truth. He does not offer pure evil, but offers the light of reason, which may seem dangerous to those who prefer to remain in the shadow of a controlled system. This is not about worshiping evil or destruction, but about inner transformation, about the awakening of consciousness, about finding one's true self circumventing imposed frameworks. Lucifer in this context is the spark of divine reason within each of us, calling for free thought, for the unfolding of one's potential, for conscious choice, rather than blindly following beaten paths. He is the one who bestows the light of knowledge, not the one who dooms to darkness. This is a perspective that turns conventional notions on their head, offering a profound philosophical reinterpretation of the myth of the Lightbringer. So, before us unfolds an astonishing picture, two diametrically opposed yet each captivating views of the same figure born from ancient texts. On one side, a cold, historical, and linguistic analysis that returns us to the roots of the word and shows the complex evolution of theological thought. It highlights how interpretations layered upon each other, creating an image that did not exist at the very beginning. On the other, visionary, mystical, and esoteric interpretations that imbue the ancient image with new, at times shocking, but always profound and liberating meanings. They see in Lucifer not an antagonist, but a guide to inner wisdom and freedom. This chapter, more than any other, reveals the incredible dynamism and truly boundless, multifaceted nature of Lucifer's image. From ancient Near Eastern royal laments to medieval morality, plays from romantic poems that made him a tragic hero to modern esoteric teachings that see him as an archetype of enlightenment, he continues to evolve, to be reinterpreted, and most surprisingly, still sparks fervent debates and deep reflections across diverse cultures and spiritual contexts. He is not merely a character from myths or dogmas, but an endlessly changing symbol, a mirror of our own fears, ambitions, searches for freedom, and yearning for the light of knowledge in this complex and multifaceted world. This journey through the centuries has shown that the story of Lucifer is not just a myth, but an astonishing mirror reflecting our changing understanding of good and evil, light and darkness. From a functional accuser to the fallen king of hell and a symbol of enlightenment, his image has been constantly reinterpreted, demonstrating the boundless power of human interpretation. What then does this paradoxical evolution tell us about the very nature of truth and our inherent need to imbue meaning into what sometimes seems unfathomable? Tell us what you think about this incredible story in the comments. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new in-depth explorations. And of course, give a like if this video made you think.